I came home from work on a Tuesday afternoon in late March to find a brand new concrete sidewalk cutting straight through my front yard in Scottsdale, Arizona, destroying my carefully maintained landscape garden that I had spent 3 years cultivating. The sidewalk ran directly through the middle of my property, obliterating my Japanese maple tree, crushing my stone borders, and covering the native desert plants I had painstakingly arranged to complement the xeriscaping design. My blood pressure spiked immediately as I stood there staring at the destruction, my work bag still hanging from my shoulder. I am Xavier Emerson, a software engineer who had purchased this corner lot property specifically because of its unique position and the extra space it provided for my landscaping hobby. The house sat on nearly half an acre, which was generous for this neighborhood, and I had transformed what was once a boring gravel yard into something that had won me a local garden club award last year. Now, a 4-foot-wide concrete path sliced right through it like someone had taken a knife to a painting. The concrete was still wet in some places, and I could see the footprints of workers who had clearly finished just hours before. There were no warning signs, no notices on my door, nothing that indicated anyone had planned to do this. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures from every angle, documenting the damage meticulously. My hands were shaking with anger as I photographed the destroyed maple tree, which had cost me $800 and was just starting to show its spring colors. The irrigation system I had installed was completely torn up, with exposed pipes sticking out of the ground where the concrete had been poured over them. I walked the length of the sidewalk, measuring it with my steps. It extended roughly 60 feet through my property, entering from the street corner and cutting diagonally across my front yard, before continuing onto my neighbor's property and beyond. This was clearly meant to be some kind of community pathway, but nobody had asked my permission or even informed me about it. I owned this land. I had the deed, I paid the property taxes, and nobody had the right to pour concrete on it without my consent. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, came out of her house when she saw me examining the sidewalk. She was an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years, long before the HOA had become what it was now. Her expression told me she knew exactly what I was thinking. "They did it this morning," she said, walking over carefully. "Started at 6 in the morning with the concrete trucks. I tried to call you, but it went to voicemail." I pulled out my phone and saw that I had indeed missed 3 calls from her. I had been in an important meeting and had silenced my phone. "Did they say anything to you? Did they have any paperwork?" She shook her head. "The workers just said they were following orders from the HOA. There was a woman here too, supervising everything. Blonde hair, about 50, wearing a pantsuit. She had a clipboard and kept telling the workers to hurry up. That would be Patricia Winters, the HOA president. I had dealt with her before over minor violations like leaving my trash cans out a few hours too long on collection day. She was exactly the type of person who thrived on the small amount of power that came with running a homeowners association. I had heard stories from other neighbors about her showing up to measure the height of their grass with a ruler and sending violation notices for mailboxes that were the wrong shade of beige. "Did she say anything about getting permission or having easement rights?" I asked. "Nothing, Mrs. Chen replied. When I asked her about it, she just said it was part of the community improvement plan that was approved at the last HOA meeting. She told me to check my minutes." I had not attended the last HOA meeting because they were always scheduled during my work hours, and frankly, I had better things to do than listen to Patricia drone on about mailbox regulations for 2 hours. But even if something had been approved at a meeting, They could not just pour concrete on private property without permission. That was not how property rights worked in America. I thanked Mrs. Chen and went inside my house, immediately heading to my home office. I pulled out the folder where I kept all my property documents, including the survey I had commissioned when I bought the house 2 years ago. The survey clearly showed my property lines, and this new sidewalk was definitely within my boundaries. There was no easement marked for a public walkway, no right-of-way that would allow the city or the HOA to build on my land. Next, I found the HOA bylaws and started reading through them. The document was 73 pages of dense legal language, most of it dealing with trivial matters like approved paint colors and fence heights. I finally found the section on community improvements, which stated that any modifications to common areas required a majority vote at a properly noticed meeting. But it said nothing about improvements on private property, because of course it could not. The HOA did not own my land. I sent an email to the HOA board, addressing it to Patricia and the other 4 board members. I kept it professional but firm, explaining that a sidewalk had been constructed on my private property without my knowledge or consent, and that I expected a response within 24 hours explaining the legal basis for this action and outlining how they planned to remove it and restore my property. The response came faster than I expected. Within an hour, my phone rang from a number I did not recognize. I answered it. "Mr. Emerson, this is Patricia Winters from the HOA board." Her voice had that particular tone of someone who was used to being obeyed without question. "I received your email, and I think there has been some misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," I said. "Your contractors poured concrete on my property without permission. That is trespassing and property damage. The sidewalk is part of our community beautification project," she said, as if that explained everything. "We voted on it at last month's meeting. It is going to connect all the houses on Sagaro Drive and provide safe walking paths for residents." "I do not care what you voted on," I replied, keeping my voice level. "You cannot build on my property without an easement or my permission. I have the survey showing my property lines, and your sidewalk is on my land." There was a pause. "Mr. Emerson, as a member of this HOA, you are bound by our bylaws and decisions made by the board. This sidewalk benefits the entire community." "Show me the easement," I said. "Show me the legal document that gives you the right to build on my property." "Because I have looked at my deed and my survey, and there is no such easement." Another pause, longer this time. "I will have our attorney look into this and get back to you." "You do that," I said. "In the meantime, I want that sidewalk removed from my property within 7 days, or I will remove it myself and bill the HOA for the cost of restoring my landscaping." "You cannot just remove community property," Patricia said, her voice rising slightly. "It is not community property. It is on my property." 7 days, Miss Winters." I hung up before she could respond. My heart was pounding, but I felt a surge of satisfaction. I had been clear about my position, and I had given them a reasonable deadline to fix their mistake. The next few days were quiet. I did not hear back from Patricia or anyone else on the board. I spent the time researching concrete removal services and getting quotes for landscape restoration. The numbers were eye-opening. Removing 60 feet of 4-foot-wide sidewalk would cost approximately $4,000. Replacing my Japanese maple tree with a similar specimen would be another $800. The irrigation system repairs would run about $1,500. New plants, soil, mulch, and stone borders would add another $2,000. Labor for the full restoration would probably push the total to around $10,000, maybe more. On the 6th day, I received a certified letter from an attorney representing the HOA. The letter stated that the sidewalk had been constructed in accordance with a community improvement plan that had been properly approved, and that as a member of the HOA, I was required to comply with all board decisions. It further stated that any attempt to damage or remove the sidewalk would result in legal action against me, including fines and potential liens against my property. I read the letter 3 times, then took it to my own attorney. David Martinez had handled my house closing and was familiar with property law. He read the letter while I sat in his office, watching his expression change from neutral to amused to outright incredulous. "This is nonsense," he said finally. "They are trying to bluff you. An HOA cannot authorize construction on private property without an easement, period. It does not matter what they voted on or what their bylaws say. They do not have the authority to override your property rights." "So I can remove it?" I asked. "Legally, yes. It is an unauthorized structure on your property. You would be within your rights to have it removed." He leaned back in his chair. "But I would recommend we send them a formal demand letter first, making it absolutely clear that they have no legal standing and giving them one final opportunity to remove it themselves. If they refuse or do not respond, then you proceed with removal and send them a bill for all costs, including the value of the destroyed landscaping." "How much do you charge for a demand letter?" I asked. "For this, $300. I will have it drafted and sent by tomorrow." I agreed, and we spent the next 30 minutes going over the details. David took notes about the destroyed plants, the irrigation damage, and the lack of any notice or permission. He asked for copies of my survey, my deed, and the HOA bylaws, which I emailed to him as soon as I got home. True to his word, David sent the demand letter the next day via certified mail and email. It was a masterpiece of legal writing, laying out in precise detail why the HOA had committed trespass, why they had no legal authority to construct on my property, and why they were liable for all damages. It gave them 5 business days to respond with a plan for removal and restoration, or I would proceed with self-help remedies and pursue full compensation. The response came on the 4th day, and it was not from the attorney. It was from Patricia herself, and she showed up at my door at 7 in the evening. I saw her through the window, standing on my porch in her typical business casual outfit, holding a folder. I considered not answering, but I was curious about what she would say in person. I opened the door but did not invite her in. "Miss Winters, Mr. Emerson, we need to talk about this situation," she said. Her tone was less imperious than it had been on the phone, but there was still an edge to it. "I think we can work this out without involving lawyers." "Your lawyer already sent me a letter threatening legal action," I pointed out. "That was premature," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I have looked into this further, and I believe we can find a compromise. I am listening." She opened her folder and pulled out a document. "We are prepared to offer you a payment of $1,000 for the easement across your property. This is more than fair, considering the sidewalk increases property values for everyone in the neighborhood." I almost laughed. "You poured concrete through my property without permission, destroyed thousands of dollars worth of landscaping, and now you want to pay me $1,000 for the privilege of keeping it there." "It is a generous offer," Patricia said stiffly. "It is insulting," I replied. "Here is my counteroffer. You remove the sidewalk at your expense, you pay for full restoration of my landscaping, and we forget this ever happened. Otherwise, I remove it myself on Monday, and you get a bill for everything." Her face flushed. "You cannot just destroy community property." "For the last time, it is not community property. It is an unauthorized structure on my private property. I have a lawyer who agrees with me, and I have a survey showing my property lines. If you want to fight this in court, go ahead, but you are going to lose, and it is going to cost the HOA a lot more than just removing the sidewalk. The other residents want this sidewalk, Patricia said, her voice rising. It connects our community. It makes it safer for people to walk. You are being selfish. I am protecting my property rights, I said. If you wanted to build a sidewalk, you should have gotten easements from all the property owners before you started pouring concrete. You do not get to take people's property just because you think it is a good idea. This is not over, Patricia said, snatching the document back into her folder. You have until Monday, I said, and closed the door. That weekend, I made preparations. I contacted a concrete removal company and scheduled them for Monday morning. I also reached out to a landscape restoration service that specialized in desert plants and xeriscaping. The owner, a man named Tom Rodriguez, came out on Saturday to look at the damage and give me a detailed quote. This is rough, Tom said, kneeling down to examine what was left of my Japanese maple. The tree had been completely crushed by the concrete, its trunk snapped off at ground level. This tree alone is going to be expensive to replace. A specimen this size, you are looking at $800 to $900, maybe more if we have to special order it. I know, I said. I bought it from a specialty nursery in Phoenix. Tom walked the length of the sidewalk, taking notes on his tablet. The irrigation system is completely shot in this section. We will need to retrench, lay new lines, replace all the emitters. The desert plants, most of these we can source locally, but the arrangement you had was custom. It is going to take some time to recreate it properly. How much total? I asked. He spent a few more minutes calculating. For complete restoration, matching what you had before as closely as possible, I would estimate $12,000. That includes the tree, all the plants, the irrigation repair, new soil and mulch, the stone borders and labor. It is going to take us about a week of work. Can you document everything for a potential legal claim? I asked. Absolutely. I will take photos of the damage, itemize every plant and material, and provide a detailed invoice showing exactly what we did and why it cost what it did. I hired him on the spot and told him to be ready to start as soon as the concrete was removed. Sunday evening, I received another phone call. This time, it was from someone named Robert Caldwell, who identified himself as another member of the HOA board. His tone was more conciliatory than Patricia's had been. Mr. Emerson, I want to apologize for how this has been handled, he said. I was not fully aware of the situation until I saw the letter from your attorney. I have been looking into the paperwork, and I can see that we do not have an easement for your property. Thank you for acknowledging that, I said, genuinely surprised. The problem is that the sidewalk has already been poured, and we have spent almost $30,000 on this project so far, Robert continued. Removing it and redoing the route would cost the HOA significantly more. Is there any way we can work something out? I gave Miss Winters my terms, I said. Remove the sidewalk, restore my property, and we are done. What if we paid for the restoration but left the sidewalk in place? He asked. We could work with your landscaper to build around it, maybe create a nice border along both sides. No, I said simply. I do not want the sidewalk on my property. I did not agree to it, and I am not going to live with it just because it is convenient for the HOA. Robert sighed. I understand your position, but you have to understand ours too. If we remove this sidewalk, it is going to be extremely difficult to explain to the other homeowners why we wasted their dues money on a project we could not complete. That is not my problem, I said. You should have verified that you had the right to build on private property before you spent the money. This is a failure of due diligence by the board." "Patricia assured us that everything was in order," Robert said, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. "She said she had checked the surveys and that the sidewalk route was all on HOA common areas or public right-of-way." That was interesting. So Patricia had either lied to the other board members or had not actually done her homework. Either way, it was not my concern. "I appreciate you calling," I said, "but my position has not changed. If the sidewalk is not removed by the end of business tomorrow, I will have it removed myself." "Please reconsider," Robert said. "Let us at least have a meeting with the full board to discuss options." "I've given you plenty of time to fix this," I said. "We are past the discussion phase." I ended the call and tried to relax for the rest of the evening, but I kept thinking about what was going to happen the next day. Part of me hoped the HOA would see reason and send a crew to remove the sidewalk themselves, but I knew Patricia well enough to doubt that would happen. She struck me as the type who would rather fight on principle than admit she had made a mistake. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and temperatures already climbing into the 70s. The concrete removal crew showed up at 8 o'clock sharp, 3 guys in a truck with jackhammers and a small excavator. The foreman, a heavy-set man named Eddie, walked the site with me and confirmed the scope of work. 60 feet of 4-foot-wide sidewalk, 4 inches thick, and we haul away all the debris, he said, reading from his work order. "You understand this is going to be loud and messy, right?" "I understand," I said. "How long will it take?" "We should be done by mid-afternoon. The jackhammers will break it up, then we will use the excavator to pull out the big pieces and load them into the truck. We will make a few trips to the dump." "Perfect. Let me know if you need anything." I went back inside and set up my laptop to work from home. I had warned my boss that I might have some noise in the background during video calls, and he had been understanding when I explained the situation. The sound of jackhammers started a few minutes later, a loud rhythmic pounding that shook the windows. At 8:30, Patricia's silver Lexus pulled up in front of my house. I watched from the window as she got out and marched up to the work crew, gesturing angrily. Eddie stopped his jackhammer and lifted his safety goggles to listen to her. I could not hear what she was saying over the noise of the other equipment, but her body language was clear enough. Eddie shook his head and pointed at me standing in the doorway. I walked out to join them. "Is there a problem?" "You cannot do this," Patricia said, turning to me. Her face was red and I could see a vein pulsing in her temple. "This is destruction of community property. This is removal of an unauthorized structure from my private property," I corrected her. "I gave you multiple chances to handle this yourselves. We are getting a court order to stop this," she said, pulling out her phone. "Good luck with that," I said. "It is going to take you at least a few days to get a hearing, and by then this sidewalk will be gone. And when you do get in front of a judge, you are going to have to explain why you think you have the right to build on someone else's property without permission." "This is outrageous," she sputtered. "The other homeowners are going to hear about this." "I am sure they will," I said. "Maybe they will start asking why the board spent their dues money on a project without verifying property rights first." Eddie looked at me. "Do you want us to keep going?" "Yes," I said. "You are authorized to be here and you have a contract with me. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." Patricia made a sound of pure frustration and stormed back to her car, phone pressed to her ear. She sat in the driver's seat for the next 20 minutes, clearly making phone calls, before finally driving away. The work crew continued breaking up the concrete, the sound of jackhammers echoing through the neighborhood. Several neighbors came out to watch, including Mrs. Chen. Some of them looked confused, Others seemed amused. One neighbor, a man named Greg who lived 3 houses down, walked over during a break in the noise. "What is going on?" he asked. I explained the situation, keeping it brief. Greg's eyebrows went up. "They just poured it without asking you," he said. "Yep. That is insane. I thought something seemed off when they came through the other day. They did not touch my property, but I figured they must have had everything worked out." "Apparently not," I said. Greg shook his head. "Patricia is going to lose her mind over this. She has been talking up this sidewalk project for months." "She should have done her homework," I said. By noon, the crew had broken up about half of the sidewalk. Chunks of concrete were piled up near the curb, waiting to be loaded into the truck. The sound of the excavator rumbled as it scraped the broken pieces off my lawn, leaving behind torn earth and exposed dirt. It was messy and loud, but it was also satisfying to watch the unauthorized structure disappearing from my property. At 1 o'clock, a Scottsdale police car pulled up. I had been half expecting this. A young officer got out and walked over to where Eddie was operating the excavator. I came out to meet him. "I am Officer Ramirez," he said. "We got a call about a noise complaint and destruction of property. Can you tell me what is going on here?" I explained the entire situation, starting with coming home to find the sidewalk poured through my property, and ending with my decision to remove it after the HOA refused to do so. Officer Ramirez took notes and asked to see my property survey and the demand letter from my attorney. I went inside and got the documents, bringing them out along with my deed and photos of the destroyed landscaping. Officer Ramirez looked through everything carefully, then walked the property line with me, comparing the survey to the actual lot boundaries. "So this sidewalk is definitely on your property," he said, more of a statement than a question. "Yes, and I never gave permission for it to be built." "And you gave the HOA notice and time to remove it themselves, multiple times in writing and through my attorney." Officer Ramirez nodded slowly. "Okay, I do not see any issue here. You are removing an unauthorized structure from your own property. That is your right." "Thank you, officer." He looked at the work crew. "You guys have a contract with the property owner?" "Yes, sir," Eddie said, pulling out his copy of our agreement. "All right, carry on. Keep the noise to reasonable hours and you are fine." Officer Ramirez turned to me. "You might want to document everything just in case this ends up in court." "I am," I assured him. After the officer left, work resumed. I felt even more confident now that the police had confirmed I was not doing anything wrong. The afternoon wore on, hot and dusty, as the crew finished breaking up the last section of sidewalk and began hauling away the debris. By 4 o'clock, all the concrete was gone, leaving behind a scar of torn earth running through what had once been my carefully arranged garden. Eddie came to the door to collect payment. "All done. We pulled out everything down to bare dirt like you asked. You are going to want to get that filled in and planted soon, or you will have an erosion problem when it rains." "I have a landscaper starting tomorrow," I said, handing him a check for $4,000. "Good deal. If you need any more concrete work done the right way, give us a call." He grinned. After the crew left, I walked the property again, taking photos of the empty strip where the sidewalk had been. The ground was rough and torn, with bits of gravel and concrete dust scattered across it. My irrigation pipes stuck up like broken bones. It looked worse than before, but at least the unauthorized structure was gone. Tom Rodriguez showed up an hour later to look at the site and confirm his plans. "Okay, this is what I was expecting," he said. "We will start tomorrow morning. First thing is to get the irrigation system repaired and tested. Then we will bring in new soil and level everything out. The plants will come last, once we have a good base established." Sounds good, I said. Remember, I need detailed documentation of everything. You got it. I will take photos at every stage and keep all the receipts. That evening, I drafted a detailed invoice for the HOA. I included the concrete removal cost, Tom's quote for the landscaping restoration, the cost of my attorney's demand letter, the value of the original destroyed landscaping based on my purchase receipts, and compensation for my time dealing with this mess at my hourly consulting rate. The total came to just over $17,000. I sent the invoice via email and certified mail to the HOA board, with a cover letter explaining that this was the cost of their unauthorized construction on my property and requesting payment within 30 days. I also sent copies to my attorney and kept detailed records of everything. The response came faster than I expected, but not from Patricia. Robert Caldwell called me the next morning and he sounded stressed. "Mr. Emerson, I just saw your invoice," he said. $17,000 is more than half our annual budget. Then you should not have poured concrete on my property without permission, I said. I understand you are upset, but this is going to cripple the HOA financially. We do not have that kind of money available. That is not my problem. You are responsible for the damages you caused. Can we work out a payment plan? Robert asked. Maybe spread it out over a year or two. I considered this. I did not actually want to bankrupt the HOA because that would affect property values for everyone, including me. I will agree to a payment plan if you put it in writing and guarantee the payments. But I want the first payment of $5,000 within 30 days, and the rest paid over the following 12 months with interest. Interest? Robert sounded pained. You are asking me to finance your mistake. Yes, interest, 5% annually. There was a long silence. I will have to take this to the board. You do that. And Robert, make sure Patricia understands that if you try to fight this, you are going to end up paying a lot more in legal fees. My attorney is already prepared to file a lawsuit for trespass and property damage if necessary. I will talk to them, Robert said quietly and hung up. Over the next week, Tom's crew worked on my property, gradually transforming the torn-up strip of dirt back into something that resembled my original landscaping. They repaired the irrigation system first, replacing all the damaged pipes and emitters and testing everything to make sure there were no leaks. Then they brought in several tons of new soil, leveling and grading it to match the surrounding terrain. The plants came next, carefully selected to match the species and sizes of what had been destroyed. Tom found a Japanese maple that was almost identical to my original tree, with the same graceful branching structure and deep red leaves just starting to emerge. It cost $900, but it was worth it to restore the centerpiece of the garden. Native desert plants followed, including callas, brittlebush, penstemon, and various agaves. Tom arranged them in a naturalistic pattern that mimicked the original design while making small improvements to the flow and color balance. New stone borders defined the beds, and a fresh layer of decorative gravel completed the look. By the end of the week, you could barely tell that anything had been disturbed, except that everything looked a bit newer and fresher than the surrounding landscaping. Tom's crew had done excellent work, and I told him so when he presented me with the final invoice. $12,300, he said, showing me the itemized breakdown. A little over estimate because the maple ended up costing more, but we made up some of the difference on labor. This looks great, I said, reviewing the invoice. Every plant was listed with its species, size, and cost. Every material was documented with receipts. The labor hours were broken down by task. It was exactly what I needed for my claim against the HOA. I paid Tom in full, and added his invoice to my documentation file, which was growing quite thick. I had photos from every stage of the project, all the receipts, the work contracts, the property survey, the attorney letters, and my original photos of the destroyed landscaping. If the HOA wanted to dispute my claim, I had everything I needed to prove my case. 2 weeks after I sent my invoice, I received a formal letter from the HOA board. It was signed by all 5 members, including Patricia, though I suspected she had not wanted to sign it. The letter acknowledged that the sidewalk had been constructed on my property without proper authorization, apologized for the error, and agreed to pay the full amount I had invoiced under the payment plan I had proposed. The first payment of $5,000 would be made within 15 days, and the remaining balance would be paid in 12 monthly installments of $1,100 each, including interest. The letter also included a formal release, stating that upon receipt of full payment, I would not pursue any further legal claims related to the sidewalk incident. I reviewed the letter with David Martinez, who confirmed that it was legally binding and protected my interests. "This is a good outcome," he said. "You are getting full compensation, and they are admitting liability. If they default on the payments, you can take them straight to court with this agreement as evidence." "What about Patricia?" I asked. "Is she facing any consequences?" David shrugged. "That is an internal HOA matter. The other board members might remove her, or she might resign, but that is up to them. Your concern is getting paid." I signed the release agreement, making it contingent on receipt of all payments, and sent it back to the HOA. The first check arrived 2 weeks later, drawn on the HOA operating account and signed by Robert Caldwell as treasurer. I deposited it immediately. The monthly payments came like clockwork after that. By the 6th month, I had received over $11,000, and my landscaping was thriving under the Arizona sun. The Japanese maple had adjusted well to its new location, and the desert plants were spreading and blooming in colorful displays of yellow, red, and purple. But the story was not quite over. In month 7, I attended my first HOA meeting in over a year. I was curious about what had happened internally after the sidewalk fiasco, and I wanted to make sure they were still committed to paying me the rest of what they owed. The meeting was held at the community center, a small building at the entrance to the neighborhood. About 20 homeowners were there, which was a good turnout by HOA standards. I took a seat in the back and watched as the board members filed in to sit at the front table. Patricia was not among them. Robert Caldwell called the meeting to order and introduced 2 new board members who had been elected in a special vote. He then addressed what he called the sidewalk situation, giving a sanitized version of events that basically admitted the board had made an error in judgment and was working to resolve it. "We are currently making monthly payments to Mr. Emerson for the damages caused by the unauthorized construction on his property," Robert said, not quite looking at me. "These payments are on schedule, and we expect to have the matter fully resolved within the next 5 months. A homeowner raised her hand. "What happened to Patricia? I thought she was board president." Robert shifted uncomfortably. "Miss Winters resigned from the board 3 months ago to pursue other interests." There were murmurs around the room. Everyone knew that "resigned to pursue other interests" was code for being forced out. I felt a twinge of something, maybe satisfaction, maybe pity. Patricia had made a serious mistake, but I doubted she had acted with malicious intent. She had just been so convinced of her own authority that she had not bothered to verify the legal basics. After the meeting, Robert approached me. "Mr. Emerson, I want to thank you for being reasonable about the payment plan. A lot of people would have just sued us immediately." I considered it. I admitted, but this outcome works better for everyone. We have learned some hard lessons from this, Robert said. We have implemented new procedures for any future projects that might involve property boundaries. Every plan has to be reviewed by our attorney now before we spend any money or sign any contracts. That seems like a good policy, I said. It should have been our policy from the beginning, Robert replied. Patricia was very confident that she knew what she was doing and the rest of us trusted her judgment. That was our mistake, I nodded. There was not much else to say. The HOA had screwed up, they were paying for it, and hopefully they had learned something from the experience. The final payment arrived on schedule in month 12, bringing my total recovery to exactly $17,468, including interest. I deposited the check and sent a final receipt to the HOA, formally closing out the matter. My landscaping continued to mature and flourish. The Japanese maple grew taller and fuller, its red leaves a stunning contrast against the green of the other plants. The stone borders and gravel pathways created a structured yet natural look that was both aesthetically pleasing and water efficient. I even won another award from the local garden club, which felt like a vindication of all the work I had put into restoring the space. But there was one more twist to the story. About 6 months after the final payment, I ran into Patricia at a grocery store in Scottsdale. I almost did not recognize her at first. She looked older, more tired, and she was wearing jeans and a t-shirt instead of her usual business casual attire. She saw me at the same moment, and for a second, I thought she might turn and walk away. But she did not. She pushed her cart over to where I was standing in the produce section. "Hello, Xavier," she said quietly. "Patricia," I replied, not sure what else to say. "I owe you an apology," she said. The words seemed to cost her something. "What happened with the sidewalk, that was my fault. I should have verified the property boundaries before we started construction. I was so focused on completing the project and making our neighborhood better that I did not do my due diligence. I was genuinely surprised. I appreciate you saying that. I resigned from the board," she continued. "Well, they asked me to resign and I agreed. It was the right thing to do. I had become too controlling, too convinced that I knew what was best for everyone. The sidewalk thing was just the final straw." "What are you doing now?" I asked. "I am taking a break from volunteer work," she said with a small, sad smile. "Spending more time with my family, focusing on things that actually matter. It turns out that being HOA president was not as important as I thought it was." "That sounds healthy," I said, and I meant it. "I am glad your garden looks nice again," Patricia said. "I drive by sometimes and it really is beautiful. I am sorry we destroyed it." "It is fixed now," I said. "And honestly, the new version is even better than the original. Sometimes you can improve on something when you have to rebuild it." Patricia nodded. Maybe that is true for more than just gardens. We talked for a few more minutes, just small talk about the neighborhood and the weather, and then we said goodbye. As I watched her walk away with her shopping cart, I felt something shift inside me. I had been angry about the sidewalk, righteously so, but holding on to that anger was not serving any purpose anymore. The HOA had paid for their mistake. Patricia had faced consequences and seemed to have learned from them, and my property was restored. Sometimes in life, you have to stand up for your rights and refuse to be pushed around, especially by petty bureaucrats who think they can do whatever they want. But once you have won, once justice has been served and compensation has been paid, you also have to let go and move on. Carrying grudges is exhausting, and it does not make anything better. I finished my grocery shopping and drove home, pulling into my driveway and looking at my front yard with fresh eyes. The garden was thriving, better than ever, and the whole nightmare with the sidewalk had taught me valuable lessons about property rights, legal processes, and standing up for myself. More importantly, it had taught me that HOA boards are not all powerful, that property owners have rights that cannot be overridden by committee votes, and that documentation and proper legal procedures can win the day against arbitrary authority. I had copies of everything filed away in case I ever needed to reference the case again, and I knew that other homeowners in the neighborhood had heard the story and learned from it. The following spring, at the annual HOA meeting, the board proposed another community improvement project, this time installing new lighting along the main streets. But this time, they presented a detailed map showing the exact locations of every light pole, all of which were carefully positioned on public right-of-way or HOA common areas. They also presented documentation from their attorney confirming that no private property would be affected. Several homeowners asked questions, and the board answered them patiently and thoroughly. The project was approved by a comfortable margin, and it was completed 6 months later without incident. The new streetlights actually looked nice and improved safety for people walking at night. I voted in favor of the lighting project because it made sense and was being done properly. I had never been against community improvements. I had just been against having my property violated without permission. There is a big difference. As I sit here now, 2 years after the sidewalk incident, my garden is mature and established. The Japanese maple is over 10 feet tall, and my property value has increased due to both the quality of my landscaping and the general improvements in the neighborhood. The HOA is functioning smoothly under new leadership that understands the importance of respecting property rights and following proper procedures. I learned a lot from the whole experience. I learned that you cannot let people push you around just because they have a title or claim some kind of authority. I learned that property rights are fundamental and protected by law, no matter what an HOA thinks it can vote to do. I learned that good documentation is essential when you are in a dispute, because facts and evidence win arguments, not emotions or volume. I also learned that people can change and grow from their mistakes, like Patricia apparently has. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all, but simply asserting your rights, getting fair compensation, and moving on with your life. The sidewalk that was poured through my property is long gone, replaced by beautiful landscaping that I am proud of every time I look at it. The HOA's bank account took a significant hit, but they recovered and are now doing better than before with proper oversight and procedures. Patricia moved on to a different phase of her life, hopefully wiser and more humble, and me. I am still living in my house in Scottsdale, still working as a software engineer, and still maintaining my garden that is once again the pride of the neighborhood. I attend HOA meetings occasionally to stay informed, but I am not interested in joining the board or getting involved in the politics. I learned my lesson about HOA drama, but I also know that if they ever try to build something on my property again without permission, I will do exactly what I did before. I will document everything, give them proper notice, remove the unauthorized structure, and send them a bill. Because property rights matter, and homeowners need to stand up for themselves when those rights are violated. The story of the HOA that poured a sidewalk through my lot has become something of a legend in the neighborhood. New residents sometimes ask me about it, and I tell them the truth. That I came home one day to find concrete where my garden used to be, that I removed it and billed the HOA for restoration, and that I got paid in full. The story usually ends with people shaking their heads in disbelief that an HOA would be so reckless. But I also tell them that the situation was resolved fairly, and that the HOA learned from their mistakes. I do not want people to think their HOA is completely dysfunctional or that living here is a nightmare. It is actually a nice neighborhood with good people, and the HOA provides useful services like maintaining the common areas and organizing community events. The sidewalk incident was an aberration, a case of one overconfident person making a serious error in judgment, compounded by a board that did not provide proper oversight. It was not malicious, just incompetent. And incompetence can be fixed through education and better procedures, which is exactly what happened. Looking back on the whole experience, I do not regret how I handled it. I stood up for my rights. I followed proper legal procedures. I documented everything carefully, and I got fair compensation for the damages I suffered. I could have been more aggressive and sued immediately, or I could have been more passive and just accepted the situation. But I think I found the right middle path, the path that led to justice, fair compensation, and eventually reconciliation. That is about as good an outcome as you can hope for when dealing with an HOA dispute. As the Arizona sun sets over my restored garden, casting long shadows from the Japanese maple and highlighting the purple blooms of the penstemon, I water the plants with my repaired irrigation system and feel grateful for the lessons learned and the problems solved. The sidewalk is gone, the garden is better than ever, and I can enjoy my property without unauthorized concrete running through it. That is exactly what I fought for, and that is exactly what I got. Sometimes, standing up for yourself really does work out in the end, especially when you have the law, the facts, and good documentation on your side. The HOA learned not to mess with property rights. The neighborhood got better leadership, and I got my garden back. In the end, that sidewalk through my lot was probably the best thing that could have happened, because it forced necessary changes and taught valuable lessons to everyone involved. Not that I would want to go through it again, but I am glad I did not back down when it happened. My property is mine, and nobody gets to build on it without my permission. That is a principle worth fighting for, and it is a fight I would take on again if I had to. But hopefully, I will never have to, because the HOA now knows better than to pour concrete on private property without easements. The story is over, the bills are paid, and the garden is blooming. Sometimes that is all you can ask for.